Hi, this video is about my feelings about Star Trek and Star Wars. Growing up as a kid, how it had an effect, how I really enjoyed it growing up, and I wore this uniform, Star Trek shirt for the video. Same kind of shirts that they wore in the new movie that came out in 2009. But anyways, my first experience with Star Trek, I think it was, I remember one Christmas that I got this yellow helmet with two bubble eye things, that you look out in, and it looked like nothing that was ever worn on Star Trek or had on Star Trek. I think some toy company just made something look spacey or futuristic looking, and then decided to put the Star Trek name on it and sell it because of the show. And then after that, I remember my brother-in-law, one of my brother-in-laws, but back then he was my sister's boyfriend, and he got me a model of the Enterprise. I remember on my birthday, one of those glued, put together type models, and the plastic glowed in the dark too, so it was pretty darn cool. And it was about as big as this one here. I picked this up at San Diego Comic-Con about back in 2009. That's when the newer movie came out, and I have a stand for it that it sits on, and that the stand broke for some reason, and the Enterprise kept falling off it. It was a really bad design. And there was even a panel that you screwed on the bottom here, so the thing would fit in there and hold it up. But that stand broke, so what I did was I made myself a new one by hand, which is very secure. And I put it up on the bookshelf. But I'm a collector, and I collect all kinds of things, and it has sounds from the TV show. It has a bunch of other sounds on there too as well. Also, like if you hold it down like this for about 5 minutes, or 5 seconds, excuse me, 5 seconds, it lights up and starts flashing. You can put it on your display stand on a shelf or on a desk, and it blinks. So, and I'm a collector. I collect a lot of that stuff. Also, when I was a kid, I had the display cases, or no, I had the figures back during that time, made by Mego, and those were pretty darn cool. I mean, they had cloth outfits. I had the play set, the bridge play set, with the transporter thing where you push the button and the thing spins like that, and the guy looks like he was transported out. I also had the walkie-talkies, communicator walkie-talkies they had back then, and I loved the reruns, and really the old series is actually my favorite out of all of them, out of all the Star Trek shows and movies. That is Star Trek to me. The original characters are Star Trek to me, and that's one of the reasons why I like the new movie, because they're returning back to those old characters, even though they're being played by different actors and actresses. But I love the Kirk and Spock movies of the 1980s, There was a couple of them I didn't like. My favorite all-time Star Trek movie is The Undiscovered Country. That's my favorite. And my favorite starship captain in that old Star Trek universe, I would have to say, is Captain Pike. I think he just seems like that tough captain, that stands for what he believes in, but he's kind of like kind of a macho kind of guy. I would love to be a star captain like that. I mean, he was, I mean, there's not really much known about that character, that particular captain. I wish what they would have done as far as making Star Trek movies, new Star Trek movies, is maybe make a movie about him and his adventures as captain of the Starship Enterprise, because there's not really much known about him. He was in The Cage. You know, what we know about that movie is he grew up in Mojave. He had a battle on Rigel 7, and the events, what happened on the Telosians, you know, on that planet. And then there was the God, how do you pronounce that? The Manjuri, or I can't pronounce that freaking word. The Menagerie, or something like that. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. The Menagerie, or something like that. I'm not very good at pronouncing that, but I remember that episode, and what we knew in that episode was the Menagerie. That's what it was, the Menagerie. And what in that episode, what we known about Pike was he was disfigured, he was paralyzed, he was disfigured because he had saved some cadets aboard a starship, and he saved their lives, and in doing so he got, I guess, radiation burns, and became paralyzed. Well, we also know about him too, and I'm glad they put him in the newer movie that came out 3 years ago. We know about what he was doing in that movie and his character and all that. So there's very little much we know about Pike, but I still like the character, and he was my favorite character in that last movie. Now, so that's what I feel about Star Trek. The old series is my favorite, and I really like that one a lot. Next up is my feelings about Star Wars. When I was a kid, I remember seeing Star Wars. I collected a lot of things even back then, and I remember that I can remember when I went and saw the first Star Wars movie when I was a young kid, and I remember standing in line, to see it. And it was a movie that was made for, very first one, was made for around $10 million, from what I understand from Lucas, what I've heard him say in interviews, that the movie was made for around $10 million. When a lot of movies back then were made for $25 million, $35 million. And the movie was a success. I can recall, after I saw Star Wars: A New Hope, I remember getting out of the theater and then standing back in line again to watch it all over again. And a lot of people were doing that. It was a really good time. I mean, Star Wars was fun. It was incredible back then. Another thing too is that, but my favorite all-time Star Wars movie is The Empire Strikes Back, and most people will tell you that. Most fans like The Empire Strikes Back. I thought the original trilogy was the best. Now, with that said, I will say this about the prequels. The prequels, I think most people agree they're not as good as the originals. However, I did enjoy them. I did enjoy them. Yes, I know that dialogues weren't very good, in some cases, but I think though, I think they were fun. And because I always, I remember in Star Wars: A New Hope, I remember when Obi-Wan Kenobi was talking to Luke, telling him about the Clone Wars and about his father and all that. During that moment in the movie, it had me thinking, what are the Clone Wars? What is that? I wish they would make a movie about that, and they did. So it was kind of a nice telling story. I mean, I just think it was, now, I know a lot of you are going to laugh at this when I say this, but my favorite prequel is Attack of the Clones. And maybe part of the reason is because I'm a Boba Fett fan and a Jango Fett fan. Jango Fett. So when I saw when I saw Attack of the Clone, I think that though out of all the Star Wars prequels, I would have to say that Revenge of the Sith is the best. I mean, it got the best. It got a lot of good reviews. It got around 80 something reviews on Rotten Tomato. But I think it's the best. But there was only one thing I did not like about Revenge of the Sith, and that was General Grievous. I didn't like that character because I thought the character seemed too cartoonish, for a live-action movie. I mean, if you notice his mannerisms, the way he talks, the sound of his voice, he just seemed too much like he came from out of a cartoon. I think that Darth Maul and Jango Fett were probably two of the coolest characters in all the prequels. And yeah, I like Jango Fett. I liked, and that was one of the reasons why I liked Attack of the Clones. I liked the battle scenes towards the end of Attack of the Clones, and I'm a Mandalorian fan. I love Mandalorian stuff and the armor and all that. And Boba Fett's my first and favorite character, but Jango Fett I liked in the prequels. And yeah, I think the prequels get a lot of people put the prequels down, but I think they're okay. I mean, they're fun. I mean, Revenge of the Sith was good. I wasn't that too big of a fan with Phantom Menace, but I liked Attack of the Clones. It is my favorite prequel. I'll take it over Revenge of the Sith. But Revenge of the Sith, I would agree that it was the better movie of the prequels, but I like Attack of the Clones better because of Jango Fett. I love that character. But Boba Fett in the original trilogy even more. And Star Wars, I understand that that Star Wars is supposed to. George Lucas was talking about maybe coming up with a live-action TV series, but that's been kind of put on the shelf because of the other projects he's doing right now. And plus, he's going to re-release the prequels and the original trilogy in the theaters in 3D. But yeah, when I grew up liking Star Wars, I love the characters. Han Solo back then was actually my favorite character. Swashbuckling kind of hero. But I like the other characters too, like Jango Fett, Boba Fett. Star Wars had a profound. I mean, it was in something incredible. The original trilogy was. I wasn't all that crazy about. I wasn't all that crazy about the. Return of the Jedi, but Empire Strikes Back was my favorite. And but then now another thing too, and I wanted to mention this in my video. There's been a lot of talk over the years, the Star Trek versus Star Wars thing. I like the franchises, and I like both franchises, and Star Wars is my foremost favorite. I think that the Star Wars versus Star Trek thing is kind of ridiculous. Let's face it, they both take place in outer space. Or most of it does take place in outer space. And there's also, those high advanced technology. But I always like to look at, Star Trek has always been known as science fiction. And there's a lot of people that argue that Star Wars is not science fiction, that it's actually fantasy. I like to think of Star Wars as science fiction, fantasy. I think it's both. I think fantasy because of the things like the queens and the princesses and the politics and the knights and the chancellor and all that kind of stuff. But I have to agree though that so I think it's kind of ridiculous. I think you can't really make that comparison. Maybe Star Trek. The main because I have always heard Star Trek fans and Star Wars fans say that you can't be a fan of one and like the other. I think that's ridiculous. I like both. I do. I think that they're both good franchises. They're very entertaining. Star Wars is supposed to take place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Star Trek's supposed to be about our future. But I guess George Lucas has referred to Star Wars before as a fairy tale, because in the opening of the movie it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. They're essentially saying there is once upon a time. So yeah, I love Star Wars. When I was a kid, I always wanted to have the Millennium Falcon. You know, I would think it'd be cool to have a ship like that. But anyways, that's all I have to say about Star Wars and Star Trek. Yeah, the whole versus thing is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Um, you know, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, I like them both. I love Star Wars. I love Star Trek. I think the franchises have been both great. Looking forward to the 3D movies. I don't know how though George Lucas is going to cash in though in on the prequels, because uh, the prequels are being re-released in re-released in the movie theaters. I don't know that he'll make much money on those. Because like Phantom Menace, a lot of people did not like Phantom Menace. So yeah, that's kind of interesting though. But no, I have to say that I love Star Wars, love Star Trek. I think the versus thing is ridiculous. I like them both. You can like both. But anyways, that's my take on both Star Wars and Star Trek. Everybody take care, and I'll talk to you all later.